She didn't flinch. That's what I remember most. No hesitation, no surprise, just the flat blink of someone who's already left the room, even while sitting 2 feet away. We were in the kitchen. Dishes in the sink, her glass of wine still half full, the air still warm with the faint aftertaste of dinner. I had leaned forward, elbows on the table like a man preparing to gamble something he didn't want to lose. "Do you even like me anymore?" She looked up from her phone, like I'd interrupted a podcast, not cracked open my chest. Her lips parted slightly, not to answer, but to measure how little she wanted to say. "You're convenient," she finally said. "Not magnetic." It landed soft, not because it lacked weight, but because I'd been hearing versions of it for months. In her sighs, in her silence, in the careful way she'd stop touching me when she laughed. Still, something broke. Not loudly, but in the slow, silent way a bridge buckles over time. That night we didn't fight. She brushed her teeth, climbed into bed, and turned away. I lay there beside her, counting the space between our shoulders like a man tracing the edge of a cliff with his toes. The next morning, I saw her birthday post. It was a carousel of curated candids, her laughing with her best friend, her blowing out candles, her sitting alone on a picnic blanket with a book, and the golden hour casting halos around her. I was in one of the photos, but barely. A sliver of my shirt in the edge of a frame, cropped so cleanly I almost admired the precision. The caption, "No one gets me, but I'm learning to feel again." I stared at it for a long time, not out of shock but recognition. This wasn't a fluke. This was staging. She wanted the world to know she was shedding something, and apparently, I was the skin she was peeling off. Later that day, she tossed me her phone from across the couch and asked if I could reorder groceries. "Don't forget oat milk," she said without looking up. "The other kind upsets my stomach." Her voice was easy, casual, like nothing had shifted. But something had. Not in her. In me. I stopped reacting. Not out of weakness, but calculation. Her apathy was no longer confusing. It was curated, intentional, strategic. I started listening differently, watching the patterns, the words she chose. Not just what she said, but what she wanted others to believe. I didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just pulling away. She was rewriting me. Backhanded compliments became her love language. "If you can even call it that. You're not as boring when you're focused," she'd say, watching me work late at the kitchen table, laptop glowing, coffee gone cold. Or, "You look decent in that shirt, not like a dad trying too hard." I wasn't a father. I think that made the joke funnier for her. Publicly, she played it lighter. Smiles on cue, shoulder touches during brunch with friends, the occasional arm link that felt more like choreography than affection. But in private, she flattened me. Slowly, elegantly. Some nights she wouldn't speak at all. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd shrug without turning. I began cataloging the silences, tracking how often she could go without even a good night. Sometimes 3 days. Once, a full week. When I brought it up, she didn't argue. She simply exhaled and said, "I'm not going to contort myself anymore just to make you feel safe." I nodded, pretending that sentence made sense. She framed it all as growth. "My therapist says I need to stop overfunctioning for people," she told me one morning while buttering toast. "I've spent years doing emotional labor for men. I'm done." What she meant was, "You go last." I don't think she even knew she was punishing me. Or maybe she did, and the cruelty just registered as self-care in her new belief system. It was hard to tell anymore. I found a notebook in her purse one night, while looking for a receipt. It wasn't hidden. Inside were affirmations, checklists, reframed memories. One entry read, "I do not have to explain my choices to people who haven't earned my energy." It took me a moment to realize people included me. Maybe especially me. She'd built herself a new moral scaffolding, one where I was cast as the emotional parasite. The guy who spiraled, who needed too much, who couldn't self-regulate. I recognized the pattern too late. The redefinition had already begun. And then came the DM. From a mutual friend. Someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Just FYI, she's been telling people you're emotionally unpredictable." I sat with that for a while, letting the words press into my ribs like an old bruise being prodded. I asked for screenshots, not because I didn't believe it, but because I needed to see the angles she was constructing. And there it was. "I feel tense around him. He gets overwhelmed if I don't reassure him." Same day, she posted a photo. New dress. New smile. New man. The caption? reclaiming joy. She hadn't left yet, but she was already moving on, publicly, with lighting. And I finally understood. She wasn't just falling out of love. She was laying the groundwork to make me the reason she left. I didn't reply to the DM, didn't ask who else she told, didn't defend myself. I just stared at the screenshots, reading the same lines over and over. He gets overwhelmed if I don't validate him. He always seems to need reassurance. I never feel emotionally steady when I'm around him. None of it was loud. That was the brilliance of it. She didn't accuse me of yelling or controlling or threatening. She just planted seeds, subtle, quiet distortions, enough to give her distance, enough to make people wonder. And the people wondering were people I'd known longer than her. She hadn't filed anything yet, but she didn't need to. The court of public opinion was already being fed a story. The man she was detaching from wasn't cruel. He was cold, disconnected, difficult, the soft kind of dangerous. And in her hands that was enough. The next week, a letter arrived. Her lawyer, someone I'd met once at a party, sent a preliminary separation proposal. It wasn't formal yet, just a draft. But the tone was precise. She was positioning herself as calm, me as volatile. Phrases like emotional distance, withdrawn tendencies, and failure to provide a sense of partnership laced the document like perfume on a poisoned letter. I didn't react. I documented every shift in her tone, every social post that clashed with what she was saying privately, every timestamp. I wasn't looking to trap her. I was protecting the truth, because something told me I was going to need it, especially when I clicked on her latest post. She was sitting cross-legged on a stone bench, wearing a flowing white blouse and gazing sideways at the camera like someone deep in poetic reflection. Caption: some exits aren't escapes, they're entrances. Below it were hashtags, carefully selected, not obvious, but coded. Hashtag healing, hashtag survivor energy, hashtag truth matters, hashtag know your savior. I read them twice. My name wasn't there, but I was everywhere in the subtext. This wasn't grief. This wasn't heartbreak. This was marketing. And the man in the photo beside her? He wasn't tagged, but his arm was draped behind her like a statement, not affection, declaration. I stared at the image for a full minute, then closed my phone and sat in the dark, not angry, not heartbroken, alert. Because she wasn't just leaving me. She was staging a rebirth, and to pull it off, she needed a villain. I wasn't going to give her one, but I would find out how far she was willing to go to invent one. It wasn't the betrayal that kept me up at night, it was the strategy. She wasn't careless, she was meticulous. Each move calibrated, each narrative seeded weeks before the first public post. That's what made it harder to untangle. It wasn't a sudden rupture, it was a slow, rehearsed erasure. The man in her post? I started tracing him. He wasn't new. I remembered the name from months earlier, casually dropped in conversation like a prop. Remember Julian? The one from that trauma-informed coaching panel? She'd said once while scrolling through her DMs. He does retreats now. You'd hate him. I hadn't thought twice. I was used to the way she categorized people, curated them for the version of herself she was building that week. But now it landed differently. I looked up his name and found his website. Ex-therapist. Now a transformation consultant, with a soft voice and curated beard. His brand: truth, rebirth, boundary work. And there she was, in the testimonials. Under an alias, of course, but the phrasing was unmistakable. He helped me untangle the lies I'd accepted as love. So this wasn't casual. This wasn't spontaneous. She had been shaping this arc for months, and I was cast as the before shot, the man-shaped shadow she had to escape to finally come alive. I started cataloging it. Not for revenge. For clarity. I archived her captions, took screenshots of the shifted hashtags, tracked which friends had unfollowed me quietly. And I noticed something chilling. She was repurposing our real moments, as if they'd been red flags all along. A photo of us hiking last fall, originally captioned, "Safe, finally," now deleted. Replaced with a solo shot on the same trail, posted weeks later. Sometimes safety is silence, sometimes it's distance. She wasn't erasing me. She was converting me into material. That's when I realized the goal wasn't to leave quietly. It was to control the narrative loud enough that by the time I realized what was happening, no one would care. I kept my head down, stayed polite, replied to her lawyer with restrained, neutral language. Let her believe I was playing catch-up. In reality, I was watching the script unfold, and I knew the one thing she hadn't planned for. What would happen if I stopped defending myself, and simply let people see me? The charity event wasn't my scene. Not then anyway. I went because a mutual friend had invited me, likely out of pity disguised as inclusion. She was there, too. She always went to things like this: photo booths, artisanal cocktails, carefully planned, candid moments that could be repurposed for engagement. I hadn't seen her in weeks. When I walked in, her eyes scanned me once, then flicked away like I was background noise. That part didn't sting. What did was the ease, the performance of indifference. I made my rounds quietly. No small talk about the breakup. No long explanations. Just nods, handshakes, and a calm I had earned the hard way. Near the bar, I stood alone, sipping soda water with lime. That's when she walked over. No, not her. A woman I didn't know. Long black dress, confident posture. She leaned in, not close enough to be aggressive, but just enough for it to register. "You clean up well," she said, voice low, half amusement, half curiosity. Didn't know married men could be hot. I didn't blush. I didn't joke. I didn't even fully turn toward her. I just smiled. Not a grin. Not flirtation. Just a simple expression of someone who hadn't been called anything but a burden in months. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, the crack. My wife, ex technically, but not yet legally, was standing 20 feet away. Her expression didn't shift instantly, but something in her stance changed. Like a ripple passing through a pane of glass before it shatters, she moved toward me seconds later, her steps quick and deliberate. I stayed where I was. The woman who'd spoken to me gave a small smile and stepped away. Not flustered, just finished. My wife's voice was sharp when she reached me. "What was that?" I met her gaze. Calm. Centered. Just someone who still feels something. It wasn't a jab. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't linger on the words like I was savoring them. I simply said it and let the silence do the rest. She didn't respond. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't confirm everything she tried to obscure. I turned and walked away. Not because I was done with her, but because I'd already outgrown the need to be understood by someone who'd traded truth for applause. For the first time since all of it began, I felt something settle. Not triumph, not revenge. Just alignment. And she looked at me like she realized too late that the man she'd cropped out was never the one fading. The clip made it to stories by morning. Not mine. Someone else's. A 30-second pan of the event crowd, with no context. Just people mingling, sipping, smiling. But there I was, laughing at something just off frame. A real laugh, too. Unforced. And right behind me, blurred but unmistakable, was her. Staring. It wasn't viral, not exactly. But it spread. Especially through the smaller, curated circle she'd built. Followers who didn't know me personally but had already absorbed the version of me she'd been crafting. The version who was withdrawn, depressed, unstable. That version didn't match the man in the clip. He looked composed. And she looked unfinished. That's when the leaks started. Screenshots, private group chats, threads where she dropped little narratives like breadcrumbs. Most were soft distortions, minor tweaks to real moments to make herself sound noble, burdened, perpetually misunderstood. But some were outright fabrications, captions altered after posting, context twisted. One image she'd posted, her standing alone on a coastal cliff with a caption about finding peace, had actually been from a trip we took together. I still had the original on my phone, her, laughing, arms wrapped around my shoulders, hair whipping across my face. But in her version, I didn't exist. Someone sent me a comparison post. "This doesn't match," they wrote. Then another message. "Didn't she say you were in therapy for anger?" I never had been. And if she believed I needed it, she never said a word to me. I didn't reply. I just saved the messages. 2 sponsorships backed off her page within a week. One quietly removed her from a feature entirely. The other simply went dark. No email, no explanation. Just silence. It wasn't a takedown. It was erosion. She tried to pivot. More inspirational posts, more reflection, more vague apologies. To anyone I may have hurt while healing. But the tone shifted. Comments that used to read like fan mail now carried questions. "Didn't you edit your captions? Why are your stories so different from your photos? Isn't that the guy from your anniversary post last year?" And still, she hadn't contacted me. Not directly. Not yet. But she watched my stories. Every one. Always within the first few minutes. Because when a story starts slipping, the storyteller doesn't just worry about who believes it. They obsess over the one person who remembers what really happened. I waited for her to reach out. Not because I wanted it, but because I knew she couldn't resist the narrative control. She'd built a persona that couldn't survive silence. Eventually, she'd need to say something. Reframe something. Regain the center of the story. But before her text came, I found something else. It started with a memory, small, unassuming. She had once returned from a girls' trip in Palm Springs wearing a new ring. Not flashy, just a thin silver band she twisted absent-mindedly when she was nervous. I remembered her saying, "It's nothing. A market stall thing." Now I knew better. Julian, the man from the rebirth photos, the ex-therapist, posted a shot from his men's integration retreat, dated that same weekend. Same desert hills, same color palette. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, was her scarf. I dug deeper. There were entries in her journal I hadn't paid attention to at the time. Phrases like, "It doesn't feel wrong when I'm with him," or, "I've never laughed like that before." I had assumed they were about me, early on, back when I believed I was still in the story she was telling. But they weren't. Same man. Same trip. Same timeline. She hadn't left me for him. She'd used him to reshape how she walked away. This wasn't a replacement. It was a retelling. She was rewriting the story of the ending. Our last 6 months, the distance, the tension, the staged silence, weren't symptoms of a dying relationship. They were groundwork. She had made herself the wounded one, the silenced one, the woman clawing her way back to light. But she hadn't been escaping a prison. She'd been planning a reveal. What she didn't expect, what she couldn't orchestrate, was that the truth was still alive. In people. In memories. In metadata. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because the goal wasn't a confession. It was exposure through stillness. Every move I made from that point on was deliberate. I stopped clarifying things. I didn't defend myself when people asked questions. I let the gaps widen, let her story start to bend under its own weight. And sure enough, it began to break. When people tried to reconcile the woman who spoke about healing from emotional detachment with the one laughing next to a man she swore she'd never dated, dissonance bloomed. And once doubt starts, it doesn't retreat, it hunts. The message came at 11:42 p.m. "I miss who you used to be." No punctuation. No emojis. Just 7 words, carefully unpolished to seem raw. I didn't reply right away. I let it sit on the screen while I stared at it. Not because I was tempted, but because I knew what it meant. It wasn't an apology. It was a pivot. She'd spent months recasting me as the antagonist of her transformation. Now that version was collapsing, and she needed something softer to fall back on. Regret is easy to perform when the alternative is accountability. I didn't need to weigh my words. I already knew what to say. I typed it without editing. Someone else doesn't. No punctuation. No follow-up. I sent it and turned off my phone. There was nothing cruel in my tone. No fire. No grand declaration. Just finality. It wasn't about the woman at the event. I hadn't pursued anything. I didn't need to. That moment, the compliment, the ease, the smile, had reminded me I wasn't broken. I was just misnamed. Misframed. Misdirected. Her text didn't signal love. It signaled panic. Because when a person builds a public redemption arc, they assume the ones they left behind will stay in place, stuck, silent, unfinished. That's what made the narrative work. But I hadn't collapsed. And now she was scrambling for edits she no longer controlled. In the days that followed, she tried subtle gestures. Liked an old photo. Replied to a friend's comment I was tagged in. Posted a story of an old book we both loved with the caption, "Still holds up." All of it passive. All of it designed to remind the audience, me included, that maybe there was still a thread between us. Some shimmer of unresolved warmth. But she'd made one mistake too clearly. She'd already pulled the thread. And it unraveled everything. I didn't block her. I didn't ghost. I simply moved on. Quietly. She could reach into the past all she wanted. But I wasn't there anymore. And I wasn't following her into the fiction. She tried to pivot again, this time with intention. Her captions shifted from wounded to wise. She was no longer healing from him, but holding space for women stepping into their truth. He updated her bio to Coach, speaker, guide, rebuilder. The kind of titles that say everything and nothing. And for a moment, it seemed to work. Her engagement spiked. Comments returned. A podcast invitation landed in her inbox. She posted the teaser on her story with a gratitude-laced caption about choosing light after darkness, but truth has its own gravity. And hers had been edited one too many times. It started with a comment on one of her reels. Didn't you say he was emotionally unstable? But wasn't he at that fundraiser? Seemed pretty calm to me. Another one followed. Wait, weren't you seeing someone else during Palm Springs? Then the questions stopped being questions. They became statements. Timeline doesn't add up. Feels performative now. Is this empowerment or cover-up? She deleted some, left others, tried to mask it with new posts, long captions, vulnerability layered over curated photography. But the ratios shifted. The warmth drained. Even the algorithm seemed to lose interest. And then came the real blow. A viral thread broke down the evolution of her posts. Caption changes, edited hashtags, deleted comments. Nothing aggressive, just screenshots, side-by-sides, dates, proof. 2 brand partnerships pulled back, quietly. No statements, just absence. 1 week later, her face stopped showing up on the Explore page entirely. Her content was still there, just no longer elevated. It was as if the digital world itself had moved on. Not punished her, just declined to play along anymore. That's what stung. Not being accused, being ignored. The woman who had spent months casting herself as a phoenix had nowhere left to fly. And still, I said nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew something she didn't. When someone builds a platform on distortion, silence isn't weakness, it's precision. And it's louder than anything she could have said. I didn't post for weeks. No status updates, no vague quotes, no subtweets or quiet digs. While she spiraled into performance, I chose something rarer, stillness. And people noticed. The absence of reaction created its own kind of echo, one that made her story harder to sustain. Because when someone claims you're volatile and you respond with silence, the script starts to crumble under its own false tension. So I waited. Not out of pettiness, out of patience. Then, one evening, unplanned, but not uncalculated, I posted a single photo. It was from the charity event. Not staged, not filtered. Just a moment that happened, me, mid-laugh, shoulders relaxed, eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen in myself for years. Beside me, the woman from that night, the one who'd called me hot, with a smirk and walked away like she owed me nothing. She wasn't touching me. No suggestive pose. No flirtation. Just proximity. And light. The caption was short. Some people want a story. Some want the truth. I didn't tag her. I didn't mention names. But the message was unmistakable. It wasn't about the new woman. It wasn't about getting even. It was about reclaiming presence, mine. After being miscast for so long, I stopped correcting the record. I just let the image speak. She saw it within minutes, viewed it twice, then blocked me. But not before saving it. That part told me everything. The post wasn't viral. It didn't need to be. It reached the right people. Friends who distanced themselves quietly now reached out again. A few even admitted they believed her version until the cracks became undeniable. Not because I was loud, but because I was consistent. She, on the other hand, had nowhere left to pivot. The comments on her latest post were dry, supportive, but half-hearted. You could feel it, the fatigue of an audience watching someone cling to a character that no longer fit the plot. And I wasn't part of the plot anymore. I was out of the story, and back in my life. She didn't fade all at once. Her decline was slower, quieter, more erosion than collapse. The first thing to go was the comment section. Not shut down, just empty. The crowd that once echoed her affirmations with fire emojis and tear-eyed reactions had moved on. No conflict, just indifference. Then her engagement numbers dropped. I wouldn't have known if someone hadn't told me. Another mutual acquaintance who followed us both and sent a screenshot. Used to be 12K likes in a day, he wrote. Now she's under 1,200. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. Because it wasn't schadenfreude I felt. It was confirmation that when you build influence on a story that isn't yours to tell, the platform eventually notices, even if the followers don't say it aloud. She tried one last pivot. Healing coach. New handle. New color scheme. A series of awkward reels featuring slow piano music and affirmations read in a breathy tone. Sometimes growth looks like stillness. You are not your past. Release the guilt of becoming someone new. But the comments turned fast. Didn't you lie about your husband? Is this before or after Palm Springs? Is this healing or hiding? She didn't respond, just deleted the harsher ones, left the softer criticisms up, as if they gave her legitimacy. But even that couldn't hold. Her followers plateaued, then started falling. The link in bio turned into a 404. A coaching course she'd teased never launched. A guest podcast appearance got quietly cancelled, something about brand alignment. And just like that, her face stopped showing up. No features, no shares, no reposts. The algorithm had moved on. So had the people. Not because they chose me, but because she gave them a story that broke under its own weight. In the end, it wasn't the exposure that ended her influence. It was the silence after, when no one cared to listen anymore.